The great hall buzzed with voices from a dozen different worlds. Tall creatures with blue skin stood next to short beings covered in fur. Some had extra arms, others had no arms at all. The smell of different atmospheres mixed together in the air recycling system. This was the Galactic Defense Coalition's most important meeting of the year. General Veltara walked to the center of the room. Her forearms moved with purpose as she climbed the speaking platform. Her chitinous armor caught the light and threw rainbow colors across the walls. The room fell quiet. Everyone knew who she was. She was the hero of the Axiom Empire. The general, who had never lost a battle. The one who brought fear to her enemies and pride to her people. Today she would tell them about her greatest victory. "Friends and allies," Veltara began, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "I stand before you as the conqueror of New Busan. 3 days ago, the human colony fell to my fleet. A murmur went through the crowd. New Busan had been a strong human settlement. Many had thought it would take months to capture. Ambassador Kira leaned forward in her seat. She represented the Helix Confederation, a group known for asking hard questions. Her large eyes focused on the general with interest. In the back of the room, Commander Gino sat very still. He wore the simple gray uniform of the prisoner exchange program. His dark eyes watched the general without blinking. His hands rested calmly on his knees, but his jaw was tight. "The humans thought their world was safe," Veltara continued. She raised one of her arms high above her head. "They built their cities in the mountains. They put their defenses in the valleys. They believed geography would protect them." The general laughed, a sound like metal scraping stone. "How wrong they were. My third fleet arrived at dawn on the first day. By noon, their orbital defenses were space dust. By sunset, we controlled their skies." She began to pace across the platform, her armor clicking with each step. "The humans tried to fight us in the air. Their little ships buzzed around our cruisers like insects. We swatted them down just as easily." Several aliens in the audience nodded approvingly. War stories always pleased the coalition members. They liked to hear about quick victories and weak enemies. "On the second day, we began our ground assault," Veltara said. Her forearms moved as she spoke, painting pictures in the air. "I led the charge myself. We hit their northern defenses at sunrise. The humans ran like scared animals." Commander Gino's knuckles turned white, but he said nothing. Ambassador Kira noticed his reaction and glanced between him and the general. "Their weapons were pathetic," the general continued. "Chemical projectiles against our plasma rifles, metal armor against our energy blades. It was like watching children play at war." She stopped pacing and faced the audience directly. "But the funniest part was their tactics. They kept pulling back. Every time we advanced, they retreated. They gave up good defensive positions without a fight. I have never seen such cowardice." More approving sounds came from the crowd. Some aliens clicked their mandibles. Others stamped their feet. The general was giving them exactly what they wanted to hear. "By the third day, they were completely broken," Veltara said. Her voice grew louder with excitement. "We chased their remaining forces through the streets of their capital city. They abandoned their posts. They left their weapons behind. Some threw down their arms and begged for mercy." She spread all 4 arms wide. 72 hours. That is all it took to crush the human colony of New Busan. 72 hours to show the galaxy that the Axiom Empire cannot be stopped." The crowd erupted in cheers. Beings from across the galaxy stood and applauded. Some shouted war cries in their native languages. The general basked in their approval like a plant drinking sunlight. Ambassador Kira clapped politely, but her eyes remained on Commander Gino. He had not moved during the entire speech. He sat like a statue, staring at the general with an expression she could not read. "The human military was a joke," Veltara went on when the noise died down. "Their commander, some fool named Minho, spent more time evacuating civilians than fighting. What kind of soldier wastes time on non-combatants when his world is burning? For the first time, Commander Gino shifted in his seat. It was barely noticeable, but Ambassador Kira saw it. Their medical facilities were equally pathetic, the general continued. We found doctors trying to treat wounded soldiers in subway, tunnels, can you imagine? Using underground trains as hospitals. The humans truly are a primitive species. She laughed again, and several aliens joined her. One of their doctors, a female, actually tried to treat our wounded soldiers. She was performing surgery on one of my corporals when we found her. The foolish creature thought we would spare her for helping our people. The general's laughter grew louder. Of course, we eliminated all resistance in that facility. We could not allow such weakness to spread. Commander Gino's breathing became very slow and controlled. His eyes never left the general's face. But I want you all to understand, Veltara said, raising her voice for her grand finale. This victory was not just about taking one human world. It was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. The humans think they are special. They believe their emotions make them strong. They talk about honor and sacrifice as if these things matter in war. She slammed one fist into her other hand. The sound echoed through the hall. New Busan proved them wrong. When faced with superior firepower and better tactics, they crumbled. They ran. They abandoned their own people to save themselves. There is no honor in defeat, no matter how they try to dress it up. The crowd cheered again, even louder than before. General Veltara raised all four arms in triumph. She had given them exactly what they wanted. A story of easy victory over humanity's supposed superiority. But as she stood there, soaking in the applause, something made her look toward the back of the room. Commander Gino was still sitting quietly, his hands still resting on his knees, but now he was looking directly at her with those dark, steady eyes. For just a moment, the general felt uncomfortable. There was something in his gaze that did not match her story. Something that suggested she might not know everything about what had happened on New Busan. The feeling passed quickly. She was General Veltara, conqueror of worlds. What could one human prisoner possibly know that she did not? The applause continued. But now she found herself wondering why Commander Gino had not clapped even once. The celebration continued for another hour. Aliens from different worlds shared drinks and told their own war stories. The air filled with laughter and the sound of clinking glasses. General Veltara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and praise. But she kept looking back at the corner where Commander Gino had been sitting. His chair was empty now. She had not seen him leave. Ambassador Kira approached the general with a small smile. That was quite a presentation, she said. Her voice was polite, but something in her tone made Veltara pause. The truth always makes for good storytelling, the general replied. She took a drink from a passing server. Indeed, Kira said, though I noticed Commander Gino seemed rather quiet during your speech. Veltara's four hands tightened slightly around her glass. He is just a prisoner. What would he know about military strategy? Perhaps, Kira said. But he was there, was he not? At New Busan? The question hung in the air between them. Veltara had not thought to ask where exactly Gino had been captured. The details of individual prisoners rarely interested her. I should go, Kira said after a moment. Thank you for the educational evening. The ambassador walked away, leaving Veltara alone with her thoughts. Around her, the party continued, but she found herself distracted. Where had Gino gone, and why did his silence bother her so much? She finished her drink and excused herself from the crowd. The corridors of the Coalition station were quieter now. Most beings were either at the celebration or in their quarters. Her armor made soft clicking sounds as she walked. Veltara found herself heading toward the observation deck. It was a place she often went to think after important meetings. The deck offered a view of space that helped clear her mind. When the doors opened, she was surprised to find she was not alone. Commander Gino stood at the large window, looking out at the stars. His hands were clasped behind his back. He did not turn when she entered. "Commander," she said, trying to keep her voice casual, "I did not expect to find anyone here." "General," he replied without turning around, "I hope you do not mind. I needed some quiet." Veltara walked to the window and stood a few meters away from him. The view was magnificent. Thousands of stars stretched out before them, along with the lights of passing ships. "You left the celebration early," she said. "I am not much for parties," Gino replied. His voice was calm and even. They stood in silence for several minutes. The general found herself studying the human's profile. He was taller than most humans she had encountered. His dark hair was cut short in military fashion. There were small scars on his hands and neck that suggested he had seen combat. "You were at New Busan," she said finally. It was not a question. Gino nodded slowly. "I was." "In what capacity?" she asked. "Were you military? Civilian?" "Military," he said. "I was a commander in the Colonial Defense Force." This information surprised Veltara. She had expected him to be a low-ranking soldier or perhaps a civilian who had been caught up in the fighting. A commander would have been important enough to appear in her intelligence reports. "Which unit?" she asked. "3rd Battalion," Gino said. "We were responsible for the northern sector." The general's memory stirred. The northern sector had been one of the most difficult areas to secure. Her forces had taken higher casualties there than anywhere else. The human defenders had fought. With surprising skill and determination. "Your forces put up quite a fight," she admitted. "We did what we could," Gino said simply. Another silence fell between them. Veltara found herself wanting to know more about this quiet human. He did not seem angry or bitter, despite being a prisoner of war. He did not try to argue with her version of events or defend his people's honor. His calm acceptance was somehow more unsettling than rage would have been. "You heard my speech tonight?" she said. "I did." "And? What did you think?" Gino was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words were careful. "You have a gift for speaking to crowds." It was a diplomatic answer, but not the one she had expected. The general felt a strange urge to push harder. "But you disagree with my account?" she asked. Gino turned to look at her for the first time since she had entered the observation deck. His dark eyes were steady and thoughtful. "It was your victory," he said. "You have the right to tell it however you choose." The answer frustrated her. She had expected him to defend his people or challenge her claims. Instead, he was giving her empty diplomatic responses. "That is not what I asked," she said, her voice becoming sharper. Gino studied her face for a moment. "No," he said, "it was not." They looked at each other across the space between them. The general felt something she had not experienced in years: uncertainty. This human was not reacting the way prisoners usually did. He was not afraid of her, but he was also not hostile. He was simply present. "You must have opinions about what happened," she pressed, "about how your forces performed, about the decisions your leaders made." "I do," Gino said. "And?" He was quiet again, as if deciding whether to speak. Finally, he said, "May I ask you something, General?" The question surprised her. "Very well. In all your victories, have you ever spoken to survivors, to the people who lived through your campaigns?" Veltara considered this. She had interrogated prisoners for intelligence. She had accepted surrenders from defeated commanders, but actually spoken to them about their experiences? No, she realized. She had never seen the point. "Why would I?" she asked. "Because," Gino said quietly, "the view from the ground is different from the view from orbit." The words hung between them like a challenge. The general felt a strange stirring in her chest, something between curiosity and unease. "Are you suggesting my intelligence was incomplete?" she asked. I am suggesting, Gino said, that every story has more than one side. Veltara looked back out at the stars. She thought about her speech, about the applause, about the pride she had felt. Then she thought about the casualty reports from New Busan. They had been higher than expected, much higher. She had never asked why. Want the survivors' perspective? The words came out before she could stop them. They surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise Gino. She had not planned to ask, had not even realized she wanted to know. But now that the question was out there, she found herself genuinely curious about the answer. Gino looked at her with something that might have been respect. Are you sure you want to know what really happened down there? The general felt a moment of fear. Not physical fear, but something deeper. The fear of learning that everything she thought she knew might be wrong. Yes, she heard herself say. I want to know. Gino looked out at the stars for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. New Busan was my home, he said. I was born there. My sister Hana lived there too. She ran a medical clinic in the outer districts where the miners and factory workers brought their families. General Veltara felt something twist in her stomach. She had not expected him to make it personal so quickly. When your ships appeared in our sky, Gino continued, we knew we could not win a straight fight. Your technology was too advanced, your numbers were too great, but we had something you did not expect. What was that? The general asked. Time. To prepare, Gino said. And people worth protecting. He turned to face her directly. You said your plasma artillery was devastating. You were right about that, but you did not mention what you targeted first. Veltara frowned. We hit military installations. Standard procedure. No, Gino said simply. Your first strikes hit the civilian evacuation centers. The general's 4 arms went still. That is impossible. Our targeting systems were programmed for military priorities. I was there, Gino said. I watched the first bombardment from the northern ridge. Your ships fired on the central transit hub at exactly 0600 hours. That building was full of families trying to get their children to safety. Veltara opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. She remembered now. The intelligence reports had identified the transit hub as a military coordination center. But if civilians had been using it for evacuation, the school districts were hit next, Gino continued. Then the medical centers. We lost 4 hospitals in the first hour of your attack. Those were legitimate military targets, the general said, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. Maybe according to your intelligence, Gino said, but intelligence can be wrong. He looked back out at the stars. My sister Hana was supposed to evacuate with the first civilian transport. Her clinic was in the safe zone, but when the bombardment started, wounded people began arriving. Civilians, mostly, burned by plasma fire, crushed by falling buildings. The general found herself listening despite her discomfort. What did she do? What she always did, Gino said. She helped people. She sent her staff away on the transports, but she stayed behind to treat the wounded. She said someone had to. Veltara remembered her speech about the subway hospitals. The underground medical facilities were not planned, Gino finished. They were improvised. When you destroyed the real hospitals, people like my sister had to find new places to save lives. The subway tunnels were deep enough to protect patients from your bombardment. The general felt a cold sensation spreading through her chest. But surely the military response was inadequate. Your forces scattered when we advanced. Gino was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Tell me, General, what do you know about Captain Minho? Your commanding officer, Veltara said, a coward who wasted time on civilians instead of fighting. Minho was a teacher before the war, Gino said. He taught history at the local university. When the colony formed its defense force, they made him a captain because he was good at organizing people. He had never wanted to be a soldier. The human's voice grew softer. On the first day of your attack, Minho made a choice. He could try to hold our positions and maybe delay your advance by a few hours. Or he could use our forces to cover civilian evacuations. He chose to run, Veltara said. He chose to save lives, Gino corrected. Every time we pulled back, it was to protect evacuating civilians. Every defensive position we abandoned was because keeping it would have cost too many innocent lives. But General's mind raced back to her tactical reports. The human withdrawals had been orderly, almost perfectly timed. She had assumed it was cowardice. But what if it had been something else entirely? The Northern Pass, she said suddenly. Your forces held that position for 18 hours. My casualties there were heavy, Gino finished. Yes, they were, because that was not a retreat. That was a last stand. He turned to look at her again. By the third day, most of the civilians were safely away. The transports had reached the outer system. That was when Minho made his final choice. Which was? To stop running, Gino said. To make your victory cost something. Veltara felt her legs grow weak. She had never thought about why the final battles had been so fierce. In her mind, they had simply been the death throes of a beaten enemy. The Northern Pass was the last position between your forces and my sister's clinic, Gino continued. She was still there, still treating wounded people, still trying to save lives even as your army advanced. Why did she not evacuate? The general asked. Because she had patients who could not be moved, Gino said. 17 wounded civilians, and 3 of your soldiers. Veltara's blood turned to ice. Our soldiers? They had been shot down on the second day, Gino explained. Their transport crashed near the clinic. They were unconscious, badly injured. My sister's staff brought them inside. The general stared at him. She treated enemy soldiers? She treated patients, Gino said simply. That was all she ever saw. People who needed help. Veltara remembered her report about the medical facility. She had written it herself. Eliminated remaining resistance in civilian structure. She had never asked for details. Captain Minho knew your forces would reach the clinic eventually, Gino went on. He also knew that if he pulled his people back any further, you would overrun it before the patients could be evacuated. So he made his stand, the general said quietly. He made his stand, Gino confirmed. A history teacher and 300 volunteers, most of them factory workers and farmers, against your professional military. The human was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Do you know what Minho told us before the final battle? Veltara shook her head. He said, We cannot win this fight, but we can make sure it matters. We can buy time for the people who heal instead of hurt. We can show the galaxy what humans really value. The general felt tears forming in her eyes, though she did not understand why. What happened to him? He died holding the pass, Gino said, along with most of his people. But they held you back long enough for the medical transports to evacuate the seriously wounded patients. And your sister? Gino's voice grew even quieter. She stayed until the end. She said someone had to be there for the patients who could not be moved, including your 3 soldiers. Veltara found herself afraid to ask the next question, but she had to know. What happened when we reached the clinic? Gino looked at her with those steady dark eyes. That, he said, is what you really need to hear. General Veltara's 4 hands gripped the window ledge. She did not want to hear what came next, but she could not stop herself from asking. Tell me about the clinic, she said. Gino was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I was trapped in a collapsed building 3 blocks away when your forces reached Hana's clinic. But I heard the reports over the radio. Lieutenant Soman was with my sister at the time. Lieutenant Soman? Veltara asked. My communications. Officer, Gino said. She had been wounded on the 2nd day, a piece of shrapnel in her leg. Hana insisted on treating her personally. The general felt her chest tighten. Go on. Soman told me later what happened, Gino continued. Your advance unit reached the clinic at 1400 hours. They came in ready for a fight. Weapons raised, expecting resistance. He paused, looking out at the stars. Instead, they found my sister in the main treatment room. She was performing surgery on one of your corporals, the one who had been unconscious for 2 days. Veltara closed her eyes. She could picture the scene too clearly. Hana looked up when your soldiers entered, Gino said. She was still wearing surgical gloves covered in blood. Your corporal's blood. She had been working on him for 3 hours, trying to repair damage to his internal organs. What did she do? The general asked, though she dreaded the answer. She smiled, Gino said simply. She smiled and asked in broken axiom if they needed medical assistance. The general's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her armor scraping against the metal. Your soldiers did not know what to do, Gino continued. They had expected to find armed resistance. Instead, they found a human woman trying to save the life of their comrade. The report said, Veltara began. The report said you eliminated remaining resistance, Gino finished. I have read it, but that was not what happened. He knelt down beside her, his voice gentle but firm. Your unit commander, Sergeant Thekalon, ordered my sister to step away from the operating table. She shook her head and said she could not leave a patient in the middle of surgery. The general looked up at him. She refused a direct order? She refused to let someone die, Gino said. Even someone from an enemy army. Veltara felt something breaking inside her chest. What happened next? Sergeant Thekalon called for his medical officer, Gino said. When the medic arrived, he looked at your corporal and said the surgery was too advanced to stop. If they moved the patient or interrupted the procedure, he would die. So they let her continue? The general asked hopefully. They did, Gino said. For 20 minutes, a human doctor and an Axiom medic worked together to save the life of an enemy soldier. Lieutenant Soman said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Veltara wiped tears from her eyes. Did they save him? They did, Gino said. Corporal Vextane survived because my sister refused to give up on him. The general felt a moment of relief, then saw the sadness in Gino's eyes. But that is not the end of the story. No, he said quietly. It is not. Gino stood up and walked back to the window. While Hana was operating, more of your forces arrived. The unit that had been fighting in the northern districts. They had taken heavy casualties. They were angry and looking for revenge. Oh no, Veltara whispered. Their commander, Captain Zodan, saw human and Axiom medical staff working together. He saw wounded enemy soldiers being treated alongside. His own people. He called it treason. The general's blood turned cold. She knew Captain Zodan. He was a good soldier, but not a good person. He believed enemies deserved no mercy. Captain Zodan ordered the immediate execution of all human personnel in the facility. Gino continued. Sergeant Theklon tried to argue. He explained that the humans were providing medical aid to Axiom soldiers, but Zodan would not listen. What did your sister do? Veltara asked, though she was afraid to know. She stepped in front of her patients, Gino said. All of them, human and Axiom alike. She told Captain Zodan that if he wanted to kill her patients, he would have to kill her first. The general covered her face with her hands. Please tell me he showed mercy. Lieutenant Somin begged him to spare the medical staff, Gino said. Even some of your own soldiers spoke up for my sister. They had seen her working to save their comrades. But Captain Zodan said the war was not over. He could not allow enemies to live. Veltara looked up. How did you survive? You said you were trapped in a building. I was rescued 18 hours after the clinic fell, Gino said. By your people, actually. A search and rescue team found me buried under rubble. They dug me out, treated my injuries. and saved my life. But your sister was already gone, Gino finished. Captain Zodan's report said the clinic was destroyed to prevent enemy forces from using it. He mentioned eliminating several hostile combatants. He never mentioned that those combatants were doctors and nurses trying to save lives. The general felt sick. I signed that report. I approved his actions. You could not have known, Gino said. You were not there. But I should have asked, Veltara said. I should have wanted details. Gino nodded slowly. Yes, you should have. They sat in silence for several minutes. The general tried to process everything she had learned. Her great victory, the triumph she had celebrated, was built on the deaths of people who had shown more honor than she had ever imagined. The other patients, she asked finally. What happened to them? The wounded civilians died with the medical staff, Gino said. But your 3 soldiers lived. The medic who had worked with my sister made sure they were evacuated safely. Do you know their names? Veltara asked. Corporal Vextane, Private Kelmore, and Specialist Torgan, Gino said immediately. My sister saved all 3 of their lives. The general memorized the names. She would find these soldiers. She would learn their stories. She would make sure they knew what a human doctor had sacrificed for them. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Gino looked at her with something that might have been pity. Because you asked. And because my sister believed that understanding was the first step toward healing. Even after everything that happened to her? Especially after everything that happened to her, Gino said. She died believing that people could be better than their worst moments, that enemies could become friends if they just understood each other. Veltara stood up slowly, her armor feeling heavier than ever before. I do not deserve her forgiveness. Maybe not, Gino said. But you have it anyway. That is the kind of person she was. The general looked out at the stars and wondered how. Many other stories like this existed. How many victories had she celebrated without understanding their true cost? There is more? Is there not? She asked. Gino nodded. There is always more. General Veltara stared at her reflection in the window. The proud warrior who had entered this room seemed like a stranger now. Behind her reflection, she could see Gino waiting patiently. You said there was more? She said without turning around. There is, Gino replied. But first, I want to tell you how I survived. The general finally turned to face him. You were trapped in a building. For 18 hours, Gino confirmed. A plasma blast had brought down most of the structure. I was pinned under a steel beam, barely conscious. I could hear the fighting getting closer, but I could not move. He sat down on one of the observation deck chairs. I thought I was going to die there, alone, forgotten, buried under the ruins of my home. But you did not, Veltara said. No, your rescue teams found me. Gino looked directly at her. Specialist Krivon and his unit were searching for Axiom survivors when they heard me calling for help. They could have left me there. I was just another enemy soldier. The general felt a familiar twist in her stomach. But they did not leave. You. Specialist Krivon spent 4 hours digging me out, Gino said. His team used their equipment to cut through the metal beam. They gave me their medical supplies. They carried me to safety on a stretcher meant for their own wounded. Veltara sat down across from him. Why are you telling me this? Because it matters, Gino said. Your soldiers could have followed Captain Zodan's example. They could have left their enemies to die. But they chose to save lives instead. The general thought about this. In all her reports, she had only heard about the fighting, the victories, the strategic successes. No one had told her about acts of mercy. Specialist Krivon visited me in the prison hospital, Gino continued. He brought news about the other survivors. He told me that several Axiom medics had spoken up for the human medical staff. They had tried to protect people like my sister. But they failed, Veltara said bitterly. Some did, Gino agreed. But others succeeded. Do you want to know about them? The general nodded, though she was not sure she could handle any more revelations. Dr. Kelthara, your chief medical officer, saved 43 human civilians, Gino said. She hid them in her field hospital and reported them as Axiom casualties. When the fighting ended, she helped them reunite with their families. Veltara's eyes widened. That is impossible. I would have known. Would you? Gino asked. When was the last time you read a detailed medical report? When did you last speak personally with your medical staff? The general opened her mouth to answer, then realized she could not. She had always left such details to her subordinates. Sergeant Theclon, the one who let my sister operate on your corporal, was reprimanded by Captain Zodan, Gino continued. But he was quietly promoted by Dr. Kelthara. She said he showed the kind of judgment the medical corps needed. How do you know all this? Veltara asked. Because I asked, Gino said simply. During my time in the prison hospital, I spoke to everyone I could. Axiom soldiers, human prisoners, medical staff from both sides. I wanted to understand what had really happened. The general leaned back in her chair. And what did you learn? That war brings out the worst in people, Gino said. But it also brings out the best. Your Captain Zodan was not the only officer making decisions that day. Neither was my captain, Minho. He stood up and walked back to the window. There was also Lieutenant Commander Yexara, who risked court-martial to evacuate a human school. Major Telkans, who shared his unit's rations with human prisoners. Corporal Vexitine, who tried to visit my sister's grave after he recovered. Vexitine? The soldier she operated on? He wanted to thank her, Gino said. He felt guilty that she had died saving his life. Dr. Kelthara had to explain to him that guilt was not what my sister would have wanted. Veltara felt tears on her face again. What would she have wanted? For him to live, Gino said. For him to remember that an enemy had chosen to save his life. For him to maybe make different choices because of that memory. The general stood up and joined him at the window. Did he? Make different choices? Corporal Vextane requested a transfer to the medical corps after New Busan, Gino said. He said he wanted to save lives instead of taking them. He is training to be a combat medic now. They stood together in silence, looking out at the stars. Veltara thought about her speech earlier that evening, about the applause and the congratulations, about how wrong she had been about everything. The child you mentioned, she said suddenly. Ryan, what happened to him? Gino smiled for the first time since they had started talking. He is safe. Growing up on New Terra with his aunt. He is 8 years old now and wants to be a doctor when he grows up. Like your sister. Like my sister, Gino confirmed. He says he wants to help people the way she helped people. He does not remember much about the war, but he remembers her kindness. Veltara closed her eyes. I celebrated the destruction of his world. I boasted about killing his protectors. You celebrated what you thought was a clean military victory, Gino said. You did not know about the real people affected by your actions. But I should have known, the general said. I should have asked. I should have cared. Yes, Gino said quietly. You should have. The honesty of his answer hurt, but Veltara found she respected him for it. He was not trying to make her feel better. He was simply telling her the truth. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, Gino replied. You know the real story now. You understand what your victory actually cost. The question is what you will do with that knowledge. Veltara thought about her next campaign. Her orders were to take the human colony of New Seoul within the month. She had planned to use the same tactics that had worked so well at New Busan. I have another battle coming up, she said. I know, Gino said. New soul. How do you... Because I pay attention, he said. Because I listen to the reports and the rumors. Because I try to understand what is really happening in this war. The general looked at him with new eyes. You are not just a prisoner, are you? I am whatever I need to be, Gino said. Right now, I am someone trying to prevent more tragedies, like New Busan. By talking to me? By talking to anyone who will listen, he said. By sharing stories like my sister's. By helping people understand that there are always more perspectives than the ones we see. Veltara turned away from the window and faced him directly. If I change my tactics at New Seoul, if I try to minimize civilian casualties, my superiors will ask questions. Let them ask, Gino said. Tell them you learned that protecting civilians makes military sense. Tell them that mercy can be a weapon too. And if they do not believe me, then tell them about Corporal Vexstein, Gino said. Tell them about Dr. Kelthara. Tell them about Specialist Krivan. Tell them that your own soldiers are already showing mercy and that supporting them makes you a better commander. The general thought about this. It was risky, but it was also true. She had never paid attention to the smaller acts of kindness and courage happening within her own ranks. Will you help me? She asked. How? Come with me to New Seoul, Veltara said. Help me see the battle from the ground level. Help me understand what my orders really mean. Gino was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, if I do that, I will tell you the truth, even when it hurts, even when it makes you question everything you believe. Good, the general said. That is exactly what I need. She looked out at the stars one more time, then turned toward the door. I have reports to read, medical files, personnel records. I have a lot of catching up to do. As she reached the door, Gino called after her. General? Yes. My sister would be proud of you for asking the hard questions. Veltara nodded and walked out into the corridor. She had a long night ahead of her, reading reports she had never bothered with before, learning about her own soldiers in ways she had never thought to try. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was moving toward something better than just another victory.